Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Bill Baker with Firestorm. We're pleased to have you joining us for this University of Alabama sponsored discussion of the virtual investigation. This is a continuation of our social media discussion that is being presented by our very own Karen Mazzullo, and we're pleased to have you join us for this. We also would like to invite you to become our friend at Facebook. Firestorm Solutions is our Facebook account. You can follow us on Twitter, Firestorm Soul. And yes, there's a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value, empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communication, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Please keep in mind that this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion. And the work product that we discussed today must be read and considered in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, do not interpret the information given or the advice given as legal advice or legal opinion. Firestorm is delighted to have the University of Alabama College for Continuing Studies as our co-host, sponsor, and great supporter of this webinar series. Today, we've got a commercial here. Brandy Neighbors is not able to be with us, but we'll let Karen Mazzullo make some comments about the College of Continuing Studies.
Hi, thank you, Bill, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We certainly do appreciate it, and we hope you find some value in not only our Crisis Coach series, but in those programs that are offered by the University of Alabama as well. Throughout the year, the Bama at Work program delivers the Alabama Institute on Federal Taxation program, Certified Governmental Accounting Technician program. They have a federal tax clinic and many others for cities and municipalities. And Brandy Neighbors heads that program up, and we'll have her contact information and other contact information at the end of the session. If you're interested in exploring those opportunities either through coursework or through annual events and programs they have on the campus. It's a beautiful campus, and we invite you to explore more at Bama at Work. The curriculum in their municipal programs is focused on risk management and disaster recovery and planned economic development, which is why this is such a great match and marriage for Firestorm and Bama at Work. The municipal programs include one for municipal revenue officers. That's a 3-day training institute in April and October. And then they have a conference in July. And there is the Alabama Municipal Clerks program. That's a 3-day training institute in February and August. They have monthly webinars as well, and then a conference in November. For more information on these programs, you can contact Brandy Neighbors at the University of Alabama Bama at Work program at 205-348-8559. Let Ms. Neighbors know that you heard about their programs through the Firestorm webinar, and they will make sure that you are prepared. I am Karen Mazzullo. I am a Senior Vice President and Chief Intelligence Officer for Firestorm, and my focus is on developing predictive, actionable intelligence for businesses, schools, and organizations so that you might have the ability to mitigate potential acts of violence or damage to your brand, your company, your people, and your property. Firestorm has been developing this program for the past 5.5 years. We were ahead of the curve when everyone was focused on marketing. I believe we were focused on mitigating risks, utilizing the data that we find in social and traditional media. And we'd like to talk to you a little bit about how that comes together. If you were on our webinar last month, I should have put last month we asked the question, how do you know what you don't know? And hopefully we gained some enlightenment on some things we didn't know. This week we asked, what do you do with that knowledge once you do know? Firestorm has identified 5 common failures in a crisis, and you'll hear us say this quite often. The first is to control critical supply chains. The second is to train employees for both work and home, conducting exercises and updating your plans, developing a solid crisis communications plan, and the third point is the one we're focused on today, which is identifying and monitoring all threats and risks. And the universe of social media has really changed how we go about doing that. The first thing, when we asked you to register for today's session, we asked a question. Do you have the right to review social media accounts of employees? 65% of you said no, 35% of you said yes. Well, the answer to that question is that if it's publicly posted on any social forum or in any other manner, you certainly have the right to read, look at, and aggregate that data. You don't have the right to ask an employee for their username and password or to look at any private or locked down accounts. But if someone is posting publicly, you certainly have a right to publicly look at, listen, and aggregate that data into meaningful predictive intelligence. The first thing we look at then is when a warning is triggered. Throughout the course of the day, I monitor a variety of accounts, keywords, key phrases, purposeful misspellings, addresses, a variety of data in order to source threats, warnings, or behaviors of concern for Firestorm clients. This is one example, not of a client of Firestorm, but very close to situations that we've seen where we see a specific threat that says, I'm going to kill someone at work today. Now, we've all seen people get frustrated. We've seen people yell in traffic. We've heard people utter threats, veiled threats. They come off as, well, I was just joking, I was just frustrated that day. But we have to look at everyone, put it into context, and make sure that we certainly are taking those seriously once we've looked at the entire conversation universe of a person. So we take a next step, which is a bit of a deeper investigation. Last month we covered some of the tools we use to do that. So once we've seen the threat, we then have to say, is this someone who's simply frustrated at work, or is there something more? We see a pattern with this person. Knowing I have to go to work in the morning makes me want to kill myself. That's a pretty strong statement in combination with the other statement. For your company, we know that you would prefer knowing in advance that you have a frustrated, disgruntled, or upset employee, customer, vendor, so that you can intervene and reduce the level of frustration that is growing in that person. We know you want to intervene as you can to resolve the situation. Additionally, once we looked at this person's social media profile, we realized that the workplace, their specific workplace, was identified quite often via other messages and images in their accounts. So now as a brand, I have someone who has threatened to shoot people at work. They obviously dislike their job, and they're talking about my brand and posting pictures from within the office or the environment itself. So this isn't the brand image I want demonstrated either. So I may have a couple of things going on here that require some intervention. Well, how do I know about it? If you're a business owner or a manager, you're busy throughout the day. If you have someone either internal in your organization monitoring or externally, such as Firestorm, When a threat is identified, how then do you proceed? Do you know what your process is, and do your tools support that process? Firestorm uses a couple of different tools, and one of the reasons we selected one of the tools we use, which is a Hootsuite product, is that it has a really great escalation workflow built into it. So I can add people into a specific stream or group of streams. I can have security only looking at security issues. I can have human resources looking at both those issues we deem human resource issues and security issues. I can have the leadership of the company looking at all or nothing. And then as need be, I can escalate through the application when something is a warning sign or a trigger. A well-designed program has this built-in escalation workflow to make it simple for you to map out key recipients, their specific focus within the organization, and then add them to the workflow. And that allows me, on behalf of our clients, to alert our clients very quickly if there is something that requires escalation. I can then track that escalation in the application itself. So not only do I have a well-mapped escalation workflow, but I have the ability to go back into the application and know that action has been taken, and I can export and save all of those activities on an hourly, daily, monthly, quarterly basis, so that should that detail be required in the future, documenting the actions that were taken, the alerts that were given, I have that information available to me. In this case, I show you an example where I've assigned a task. I've said escalate this. This person is exhibiting public behaviors of concern. Please look into this. And then as I go back into the application on the right, I can see where that task is assigned and take other actions with it. So this gives me the basis to stay organized within my program and my plan, because when minutes matter, we know that seconds count. You know, last year there was an incident at a UPS facility in Georgia, and for any of you who are familiar with that incident and listened to those 911 calls of those people calling in panicked while there was a shooter on the property, during a crisis, that you have no time to learn and to respond if training and programs are not in place. And because of programs like this, what we hope to do is come in earlier so that that gun never comes on the property. And if it does, we know what the proper steps to take are in order to preserve human life and certainly your business property and future revenues. So once we see a warning triggered, what happens? Do you know today on the phone, what's the protocol in your organization for reporting an observed threat or behavior of concern? Do you know? Do your employees know? I'd love it if after this webinar you asked just a couple of random people in your company, if you saw a threat against our company or our organization or our school on social media, who would you tell? What would you do with that information? And I'd love it if you'd email us and let us know what sort of this informal observation demonstrated to you. If you get a report, where does that go? Does that report go to a security team? Maybe you don't have a security team. Maybe you're a small company. Does it go to the president of the company? Does it go to the owner? Maybe it goes to HR. Or does it depend on the type of the threat? So if somebody says, boy, I had 3 beers before work this morning, who does that go to? And has the process and procedure that you've put in place been tested? Now I'd like to invite you all, I'm going to show you something just very quickly. When we speak of testing, I'd like to invite you all at next week. We are having two special virtual events. If you go to the Firestorm.com website, Firestorm.com, go to Learn on Demand. Under webinars, there are two events. One is for schools, universities, primary schools, etc., and the other is for businesses. And we're going to have an interactive virtual exercise, both for businesses and for schools. The one for businesses is on the 26th from 1:30 to 3 p.m. The one for schools is from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And I think no matter the size of your organization, it'll be a very valuable exercise and speak to exactly what we're talking about today. Has that process been tested? What I'm showing you now are some instances of examples that we surface and different language and context that is used that we ought to look for. We've learning over the past few years the language that needs to be used. And as we discussed last month, it is modified and changes based on region and location, based on culture, based on just what slang is used, on the syntax and context that's used in your specific location. What a gun may be called in Florida may not be what it's called in Washington State, and vice versa. And in all of these situations, after the fact, we see media reports that say, you know, we did surface that this person had been disgruntled and upset on their Facebook account for many months. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and we had a terrible tragedy occur at the AME church where 9 people were murdered. And again, people said, oh, you know, if only we'd known there was a threat. Well, people did know. As a matter of fact, 2 people hid the shooter's gun when that person was making threats, but they never told anybody. So if we're able to go back and have a time machine and look at these people's social accounts where they're publicly posting, not privately, we can see a level of escalation. And if we know there are behaviors of concern, possibly we can get in earlier and intervene. You know, all of these also these are terroristic threats. Some people think, oh, you know, this is a joke, bang, bang, they're all dead, as this person says on the right side bottom. Someone sent me a message and it said, just wanted to pass it along, kids are going to die at the Walton Little School. That's a really serious, actionable threat. If you look at the middle example, when there are purposeful misspellings or misformatting, we can surface those as well. We can even surface emoji. So if on one of our applications, if we surface the emoji image of a gun and the emoji image of a school, that sends an alert to us to say there's something going on here. You need to look at it more closely. But day after day, I see hundreds of these, and we look at and follow up on them. And we look at this from what are the stages of escalation, and then how do your plans align with the stages of escalation. We're in the pre-action area. In the bottom left of your screen, you see pre-action, and that's what we want to do in pre-action. We want to monitor, we want to identify threats, we want to intervene ahead of time if possible, and we want to train and practice so that everyone in your organization, whether there are 4 people or 4,000, understands the process, the procedures, the programs, the protocols, all the P's, and where to access the information so that if a threat occurs, we know exactly what to do. And in that pre-action area, we're in preparation for onset of a crisis. Now, that onset may be that we surface a threat and we're able to mitigate it. We're able to quickly move through assessment, response, and post-event because we're able to mitigate that event happening at all. Should an event happen, Your emergency response plan must then be activated. As you activate the plan and your crisis is declared, your crisis management plan is activated, and then your business continuity plan is activated, all working in conjunction. And how that fits in with behaviors of concern. This was an example that I watched occur in real time on the web, and it was in a period of about 10 minutes, and it occurred on Twitter. And this was someone who was getting really, really angry about a situation and tweeting to someone else about how angry they were getting. I'm like swallowing tears. That's how mad I am. I'm so expletived off. I just want her to stay out of my face. I hate my boss today. Expletive said, if the bursar's office don't answer, she's calling the news station on me. This was a situation where there was something complex happening within an environment. The person was told to leave. She would not leave. She continues, I just want her to stay out of my space, my face. I want to smack her. And finally says, I'm going to shoot my boss. This is an escalating issue that intervention must happen immediately. If you see something like this, then, and it's in your organization, you know who this person is, you're there, you need to have the processes and procedures in place to escalate it immediately, and other people did intervene. We need to understand behaviors of concern. At Firestorm, it's the application of our experience in combination with identified risks, threats, and vulnerabilities that provides what we call predictive and actionable intelligence. First, again, we look at the messaging. I kind of want to bring my gun to work sometimes. Let every blankety blank in here have it. It's a pretty strong phrase. And if you'll notice, this is a very anonymous account, FLFMDRN. So we don't even know if that's a real account or a fake account. It might be an account out there that scrapes other accounts and just reposts things so it looks like a real account. There's a lot of that going on. But it could be something that we really need to look at more deeply. So this screen represents when we're sitting there listening, and then we might look more deeply at these individual instances. When we look at an individual instance and look at other connected accounts, if geolocation is turned on, we can pinpoint the exact location of where that threat is coming from. If geolocation is not turned on, by looking at the sphere of influence of the person, we can generally get really close to not only locating where that person is, but what is the object of their anger. If in your company today, or your organization, or your school, if you knew that someone within your organization had posted on social media, I wasn't feeling safe at work. This guy was bringing his gun to work in his bag, and I was afraid he was going to shoot me. Would you prefer they broadcast that on social media or come to your organization and tell you that that's going on? So in addition to understanding behaviors of concern, we have got to give employees, students, and others the opportunity to report behaviors of concern in as many ways possible, and that may include anonymous reporting. How about if somebody said, so this guy told me he was going to kill me at work today. Again, do you want that on social media, or do you want it coming directly to you? And then what do you do when that threat occurs? If it's a low-level behavior of concern, there is a normal disciplinary process built into your organization. In a medium level, where it's an elevated behavior of concern, there's a threat. Someone's reporting bullying. Somebody's reporting behaviors that seem to be elevated in anger. We have to escalate into the next level, and then when it comes to physical injury or death, certainly we have very strong protocols in place, 911, and other responses. But again, sit your team down at the table today, buy them a pizza, and ask, do you know what you would do if? And see what those responses are. Our behavioral risk threat assessment is designed to work in conjunction with our predictive and actionable intelligence monitoring, and allows us to identify, assess, manage, and then continually monitor those that are exhibiting behaviors of concern long before they pose a threat of violence to themselves or others. You know, last year when there was an incident on in California of a man who had opened fire on a variety of sororities, and other young women were targeted by his violence, killing and wounding many. He had months of manifestos on YouTube. I had those videos. I've watched those videos. Sadly, it was after the fact because that was not something we were actively monitoring at that time. But he very clearly spells out what actions he's going to take and what he's going to do. So were we working within that campus or that environment, that may have been something that we could have picked up and somebody could have intervened. Sadly, his parents did do all they could to try to get intervention, and that was it was a very sad situation, and we certainly don't want that to be experienced by anyone on this call. You know, recently we also saw, just recently on the 8th, a DCF employee was shot and killed in an office parking lot by someone who had expressed great anger over losing custody of their children. And should extra protocols have been put in place to protect this DCF employee? Every program that we create is then based on an established framework and overarching policies and procedures that define not only the goals of program and how they'll be achieved, but what constitutes a threat. Our behavioral risk threat assessment program is designed to work in concert with a virtual investigation. And whatever you may call this program at your workplace, we'd like you to call it a BERTHA program, but you may have something else in place. The two pieces must work in concert together and be under the umbrella of your overarching business continuity program. But the first step in this is awareness, developing the overall awareness of not only what constitutes a threat, but what constitutes behaviors of concern. So we know a threat is, you know, I'm going to beat you up after work today. But what constitutes behaviors of concern? What starts that chain? What is the anger and frustration that may give us a key that behaviors of concern are about to escalate? Once you've created with your team what specifically constitutes a threat to us, and it may not be specifically an individual within your workplace threatening violence. It may be a customer that exhibits behaviors of concern. There may be a domestic situation that is escalating and ongoing that requires monitoring. We worked with one company that had their headquarters within the city, but that had an external location about an hour and a half outside of the city in a relatively rural area where all of their engineering team sat. And it was a high-profile energy provider. And they were constantly being targeted by eco-terrorist groups, leveraging monitoring and predictive intelligence allowed them to know when a protest was being planned, when someone was planning to attack the perimeter of their facility, cutting through gates, etc. It allowed them at those periods in time to beef up security and to protect those employees that were in the facility. So we sat down and really mapped out for your specific culture, your specific company, what are the behaviors of concern that constitute a threat for you. Next is the reporting phase. Employees, customers, vendors, visitors to your property. You can't hand all of your customers a very specific, this is our behavioral threat process, but your employees certainly that are in the building at the time if a threat is perceived must know what to do to report if a customer comes to them and says, this other customer, this vendor, or this employee has been threatening toward me. And they must be provided, again, with a multitude of means to do so. And that may include anonymous reporting of some type via the web, via an app. Now, once these reports have been made, there has to be a central repository for them. All behaviors and threats aren't equal, so it's important that those persons who are charged with responding, we call that a BAT, the Behavioral Assessment Team, and that may be 1 people, it may be 50 people. But they must have a central repository with a systematic means of gathering information from this central repository, investigating and analyzing the seriousness of each report and situation. And they also must have the ability to connect those reports that are related to each other. So if 7 reports of concern of behavior come in, we have to have the ability to join those reports together. And then, of course, you have to have that plan. So upon receipt of a report, the plan has to be activated, and the plan sets forth several steps to follow up upon receipt of a report of an incident, a threat, or any behavior of concern. And the common thread through all of this is that investigation continues. Now, in our process, we have investigation, there's screening, there's an action plan, the monitoring plan continues, and then eventually there's sign-off and record keeping. When we look at behaviors of concern, again, we know that these are often expressed on social media, but surface only after an incident. So when we work with you and your teams, we start to identify what we see as potential early warning signs. We see withdrawal. Someone who is generally very social, somebody suddenly becomes very withdrawn. They are expressing excessive feelings of isolation and being alone. They are themselves a victim of violence or feel they are being bullied. They have a low interest in their work, where before they had peak performance, suddenly they have no interest in their work, or if you are school or an organization, and it's a student, suddenly their grades certainly are a reflect. There is a history of disciplinary or violence and aggressive behavior. There's some other use. They're trying to self-medicate through drugs or alcohol. So there's a whole variety, both for businesses and for schools, that we look at. We train your teams to look for these early warning signs. And then we have some imminent warning signs that we really need to escalate. And there's destruction of property for what we might say minor reasons. There is a fascination or access to firearms or bomb making and collecting, and that is not to say that someone who collects guns is showing an imminent warning sign. That we're talking about changes in behavior, and we want to be able to intervene again before an incident occurs. We also monitor and have seen, specifically on Instagram, we see a significant elevation of behaviors of concern for suicide risk. And these are a couple of examples that we've surfaced. I'm done. I'm going to make a way to kill myself tonight. I don't care anymore. It's too freaking late to do anything before my parents might stop me now. These are really disturbing when we see them, but we are grateful that we are able to surface these early, and from a listening point of view and then from a looking point of view, zero in and find out where there is a real threat and intervene. Earlier this year, we saw an instance of someone who was exhibiting some severe signs of depression in their social account and threatening to bring a firearm to their school. And they were broadcasting from an anonymous account. And as we dug into their sphere of influence to try to get a feel for where they might be located, we realized they had 5 or 6 anonymous accounts and were messaging almost every 10 seconds from the primary account and the minor accounts to a specific boy band. And the flurry of data going back and forth was significant, and in between were messages that really indicated depression and risk. We were able to physically locate where the messages were coming from, and in the devices that geolocation was turned on, we were able to identify the specific school. We were able to get a notification to the school leadership. They were able to take some intervention procedures, and it was a well-resolved situation. But the only reason, again, we saw that was because we were looking for it. And if you're only looking for data to help your marketing efforts, you're missing a great opportunity to surface risks and threats, not only to your employees, but again, to your customers, your vendors, and your visitors to your property. The level of threats then must be laid out with actionable steps and descriptions for your teams. So sit down again with your teams. Okay, if we saw a threat, what would we do? Well, how would we classify the threat? So take a graph, just as we have here, and we're going to say, okay, it's a low threat. The threat that we surface is vague and indirect. It says, my boss is driving me crazy. The information is inconsistent and plausible, or it lacks detail. We recently, for a school district, we do monitoring for a threat came in through a hacked email account. It was very vague. It was somewhat indirect. And it turned out that while the school is in the central United States, the threat actually came from the Netherlands. And it was just someone who was trying to spark a response. So we lay out, this is what constitutes for this organization a low threat. A medium threat, it could be carried out, but it doesn't appear to be total realistic. The threat is more direct and more concrete than a low-level threat, and the wording suggests that some thought or plan has been given the threat. There's no strong indication, however, that preparatory steps have been taken. There's no images being posted on social media of guns lined up in a room or other devices. Statements seek to convey that the threat is not empty. I'm serious, I'm going to do this. But there's no actionable intent identified. And then the high threat, where it appears to pose imminent, today, we need to do something right now this morning, is where the threat is direct, specific, and plausible. And there are other details that we've given to this. We found that recently, as I discussed last month, we saw a threat where somebody said, I'm going to bring a gun to school today. And I am on the East Coast, and the threat originated from the West Coast. And I knew we had about 45 minutes before the school day began for that specific organization. And it took us a little bit longer than I would have liked. We timed it at 32 minutes, and we have now worked with our vendor and gotten that time down to 6 minutes. But we dug into the public social accounts a bit more deeply. It was an anonymous account, and so we needed to look at the sphere of influence, where we felt it could be originating, any references to geographical or landmark spots and places, and we were able to pinpoint the most likely school system for that threat. We contacted the principal of that school, who wrote us back. They did take action, and they did find ammunition and in the person's locker in school and alerted the person's parents, who did find the firearm in the person's room. So within 32 minutes, we can take actionable steps to make sure that threat doesn't walk into your building. We do this through a formal process. We have spotted an incident, threat, or behavior of concern, and then this is a general workflow that, working with your organization, would certainly be customized for your organization depending on its size, your resources, and ability to respond. For a behavioral risk threat assessment, again, the investigation continues through all phases of the program, and it documents the incident, the threat, or the behavior of concern. The behavioral risk screening then comes in if the threat is that medium or higher level that we discussed, and that's where we gather further documentation. We review the central repository for, as I discussed, those prior reports on that same subject. We take the findings then from that behavioral risk screening and decide if there is a need for a comprehensive behavioral risk assessment by a third party, forensic psychologist, your employee assistance program. There has to be that action plan as well. You can't just, report it and forget it and say, phew, okay, that's done. We have to follow up that investigation or screening with an action plan for the short and long-term interventions that are going to be implemented and documented by an HR representative or your behavioral assessment team. There has to be a monitoring plan that the behavioral assessment team makes arrangements for, and includes the supervision and the monitoring of that subject's behavior to make sure it now doesn't escalate. We want to de-escalate the issue. And then certainly there is sign-off and record keeping at every phase of it. And the investigation starts off with that predictive intelligence. We do it through social media. It's a virtual investigation. And then follow a formal workflow to assess and address the issue. All risk levels require an action and monitoring plan that we develop and implement with you, and are broken into a guarded risk level that warrants some supervision, an elevated risk level that requires more supervision, and then the severe risk level. And these plans must be actionable. We want to sit down with you and help you create the workflow and the action so that everyone in your organization knows exactly what to do if a risk is identified. Because most important, we want you to be able to predict, plan, and perform within your organization to develop a comprehensive program. As I mentioned, we want to thank our co-sponsors and underwriters of this specific session, the University of Alabama Bama at Work program. They do have a cyber risk program coming up that's going to be of great interest in January at the University of Alabama Bryant Conference Center. You can find more information on that by visiting their website at training.ua.edu. You can also contact Brandy Neighbors, as I've discussed, or Brenda Truelove for more information on any of the programs at the University of Alabama.
Karen?
What's next? Yes.
I noticed that Brandy was able to get loose. Brandy, are you on?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be involved with the webinar today. I apologize for not being on the call at the start. We had a little bit of a time difference issue, I believe. I do apologize for that. We're very excited about the partnership with Firestorm, and would be delighted to speak with anyone regarding our upcoming programs or how we may be able to assist them.
And we so appreciate the partnership we've enjoyed with you now going on 2 years, Brandy. And it's so nice to hear your voice.
Well, thank you.
For those steps next, and Brandy, thank you so much. You can contact us at webinars@firestorm.com. You can contact me directly. I'd love to hear the results of your sit-down or just your informal conversation with coworkers, peers, and employees, and find out what they would do if they identified a threat. So you can email me at kmasuo@firestorm.com. And we also want to offer to all of those of you on the call, if you'll mention the University of Alabama in your contact with us, and you can contact us via the contact link on our website or directly through email. For the first 90 days of our monitoring and predictive intelligence program, we have some reduced pricing. It's a 90-day reduced pricing trial that helps you understand your risk profile and monitoring requirements. We'll also do a high-level assessment. We do a self-assessment with you. It's about a $2,500 value, and because of our partnership, again, with the University of Alabama, it's being underwritten for you. So reach out to us. We'll be happy to get these pieces and parts of your program started so that you can predict, plan, perform, and keep your employees and properties safer. Until next time, we are Firestorm. Find us at firestorm.com, webinars@firestorm.com, and feel free to give us a call at 800-321-2219. I want to thank you for joining us today. Brandy, thank you again. Bill, as always, thank you for moderating, and that will conclude our call for today. Thank you and have a great day.